I'm Mike Bissett, the Community Development Director with the city, and it's great to have such a crowd out to allow us to share some of our initial work on the Hill Road project, which was one of the major transportation bond measure projects that the voters passed in 2014. And so I'm not going to speak much this evening, which is good for all of you. I'd like to introduce Larry Sherwood, who's our project manager that's managing this project for city staff. And I'd like to introduce Dave Simmons, who's with CH2M Hill, who's the main consultant for the project. We're going to try this without microphone. Can we hear? Everybody hear all right? Yeah. We're sort of loud, folks, so if we need to grab a microphone, somebody just raise your hand and we'll try to work it that way. But Dave, I'll let you kick this off and work us through the presentation.
Okay. All right. Wow, I gotta say, this is, I think, one of the biggest turnouts I've ever seen for a project in a really long time, so thank you for coming out tonight. Okay, so this is gonna be, most of you have been here a while, so you've seen the detail. This presentation I'm gonna run through is just, I've got about 8 slides. So I've got about 8 slides, and it's meant to be more of an overview of the project and kind of the context of the project in relation to the overall, the city's bond measure program. So this corridor, Hill Road, was identified in the city's TSP from 2010 as one that was a priority for the community to improve. And then the funding for this project was, as most of you probably know, came from the bond measure that was passed at the end of 2014. It was one of 5 of the capital projects that you as voters passed here in the community. If you live along the road and you drive it, it's probably not a big surprise that it's got some problems, and that's what this slide shows here is some of the issues that I've heard from many of you tonight. You know, obviously there are the sharp curves in the middle part of the corridor, narrow lanes, lack of sidewalks, lack of bike lanes. As you've experienced with all the rain we've had some flooding, the ditches are flowing, water's flowing through the neighborhood, so a lot of water. And then the kind of the steep grade of up near the crest there by Cemetery Road. So those are all things that this project is setting out to improve for the community. This is a cross-section for the roadway that defines between the intersections how wide the various elements of the roadway will be. So the project includes construction that will maintain 1 lane in each direction like there is today. In addition, there would be a left turn lane that would be added along with bike lanes. So the curb-to-curb section would include all of the addition of a bike lane in each direction and a center turn lane. And then outside the curb, there would be a separation, we call a planter, a landscape planting strip, and then a 5-foot sidewalk beyond that on each side of the road is what the profile called for in the city's plan. There are several intersections between the project limits, as you may know, will be run between 2nd Street and Baker Creek Road. There are 3 of those 3 intersections through that corridor where we are taking a close look at traffic volumes over a 20-year period. We've developed, the city has a traffic model, and it looks at land use along the corridor, including, many of you know, there's plans for school, additional development patterns, and what kind of trips, what kind of traffic that those development patterns, even though they may be vacant fields now, what kind of traffic they're going to generate over the next 20 years, as they develop over the next 20-year period. So the 3 intersections shown here at 2nd Street and Hill Road, Wallace Road, and then at the north end of Baker Creek Road are ones that we're particularly looking at, and looking at that 20-year horizon and how big do those intersections, how much traffic do they need to handle, and the concepts that we've got here tonight have been sized with that in mind. So you've seen around the room here, we have a lot of information on roundabouts, and it's not necessarily because we're trying to sway you that direction, but more because it's something that perhaps many of you are less familiar with. So we've provided, what we've tried to do tonight is there's some general boards around the back here that talk about what roundabouts are and how to use them as a driver, as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist. So there's some general information if you're not as familiar with them. And then all the staff are available to talk through that with you. We also have some flyers that go into more detail about that if you'd like to take one of those with you. So we've got a couple of concepts that we've brought forth tonight. Is one of them has, at those three intersections, one of the concepts has roundabouts at those three locations. And we also have a second concept that basically keeps the corridor as it is today, with a four-way stop at 2nd Street and then a stop sign on Wallace Road at that intersection, and then at Baker Creek there would also be a stop sign on Hill Road. Basically what you see there today, only widened with the turn lanes and the cross-sectional improvements that we talked about. So it's those two concepts that the engineering team has developed. We're in a real conceptual stage. There's been no decisions made. This is our first effort to bring this out to you and hear what you think. So we really do want to understand what you think about these concepts, what you like, what you don't like. There are trade-offs with any kind of project that we do. We've got some comment forms. If you feel comfortable, if there's something that we really need to know, please write it down for us so we can contact you afterwards and follow up if there's something particularly that we need more information on that'll help the engineering team. We had completed the surveying over the last few months, as well as traffic counts. We've had some wetland scientists out looking at along the roadside areas, delineating wetlands. We have developed these alternatives that we brought out to you tonight. We're hoping over the next month that we're going to go away after tonight. We're going to factor in the feedback that we've received from you. We're going to develop cost estimates for the two concepts. We're going to look at developing some other criteria, looking at impacts such as how much right-of-way does one concept need versus the other. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that. What other kinds of impacts does, so let's say, a roundabout option create versus more of a conventional intersection solution? So we'll come back with about a month with that type of information. We're going to hold another open house and present that, and we're also going to, at that time, come up with a preliminary recommendation that the project team, I believe, we would want to then take to City Council, if I'm correct in that. Correct me if I say anything wrong, okay? Overall, the next step beyond that, once we get a decision on what are we going to design, we move into the preliminary design phase in mid to late April. We'd advance that to what we call about 30% design, which then allows us to kick off our right-of-way acquisition. We will need a little bit of right-of-way with whatever solution we move forward with. Design would proceed through final design through the rest of this year, and then bidding would occur next spring. Construction would start in April, May timeframe of next year. So the idea would be is that we would construct the project next season during the summer months. And with that, we can open. If you have general questions, kind of big picture questions, I can take a few of those now. If you have really specific questions about your property and what kind of impact, I'd ask that you kind of defer that, and we're going to be around here. The individual staff, if the staff, will you raise your hands that are here tonight? Those folks can help answer your individual questions, but if you have a kind of a big picture question that kind of applies broadly, please go ahead.
Yeah, if you could just outline just briefly what are generally pros and cons for a roundabout versus what we have right now.
Sure. Everybody hear the question? Okay, pros and cons with the roundabouts. So In general, roundabouts they're better from the standpoint, they generally have better safety records, they generally reduce the kinds of the number and the severity of the kinds of accidents that you'll experience at an intersection. And for example, it eliminates, what I mean by that is, it eliminates those real serious kinds of conflicts that occur in more of a T or four-way intersection, where if somebody blows through a stop sign and they T-bone another car, with a roundabout, the geometry of that intersection changes such that the kinds of conflicts are typically much less severe. You still have the kind of rear-end accidents that you would have at a stop sign or a signal, but those are typically, more like fender bender kinds of accidents for the most part if people are driving at a reasonable speed. So safety is a big one as a pro to a roundabout. The other issue is they tend to be quite efficient in a corridor like this where the traffic flow is not that high. You don't have to stop. So from an environmental standpoint, you don't have idling vehicles waiting in a stop sign or in this case, or if there was a signal, you wouldn't have those kinds of idling vehicles. If there's no cars coming, you can just go right on through the intersection. One of the downsides is that they tend to be bigger, so they're more expensive. They can take up more property, which also has a cost and an impact associated with it. So that initial kind of capital cost is, we do have a budget here for this corridor, and so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at is can the roundabouts at these three intersections, will that fit in the budget? And are there other things, other choices that you could make in terms of trading off? If roundabouts are important, are there other elements that perhaps you could look at reducing in scope, or maybe you look at a roundabout at one intersection and not all of them, for example. So there's some solutions like that we can consider as well. I think from a technical standpoint, the engineering team feels like roundabouts would be a good solution here. I think we just need to look at, does that fit from a cost and impact standpoint? Does that answer your question?
So the only real downside is cost.
Cost is probably the major
Cost
and property, because we do need more property, and sometimes, which is cost, but it's also, if property means something and it's important for, let's say, a property owner, what kind of impact we create, maybe we impact their ability to do whatever they want with that property, that can also be a factor.
Well, my wife was T-boned at Second and Hill, so I definitely have an issue.
Well, there you go. Okay.
You're showing the two options here. Is there also a hybrid option?
And what do you mean by hybrid?
A combination of both intersections with stop signs and roundabouts?
Yes, so that could be, for example, there could be one location where you would do a roundabout and others where you just leave the stop signs that you've got. Yes, that could be a solution, particularly if budget becomes an issue for the project. That's my hands up here.
Thanks. You referred to a traffic study, like maybe Big Hill Road and Baker Creek Road, there's the three legs there currently. Was there a projected two major legs of that intersection that need to be served more? Or, you were talking about development occurring in the future. What legs are the important movements?
Well, if I understand your question, I think, as we look at development patterns, in that area, there's property kind of in the southeast quadrant of that intersection that will develop. And so I think, the general pattern is along Baker Creek within this, coming from the city, and then down Hill Road. There's less traffic coming in from the county through there, but those cars typically are coming in faster as they come into the city. So it's largely those two legs of I guess the east leg and the south leg, where you tend to see the heavy movements back and forth.
Is Hill Road going to go all the way through eventually, so it's across?
Extends north of Baker Creek?
Yeah.
Only to serve the undeveloped property between Baker Creek Road and Baker Creek itself. It's not anticipated to cross Baker Creek and tie into what would be Hill Road North, north of Baker Creek Road. So there's a possibility of an extension to serve residential area.
Because you know what, trying to take a left-hand turn from Hill Road onto Baker Creek is really pretty hard a lot of the time. Either way, whether you're coming off Baker Creek or.
How about farm equipment, because there's a lot of farm equipment that goes up and down the road.
Okay, so, yeah, how can we, with roundabouts, how can you accommodate these larger vehicles? And so that's one of the things that we look at, and actually Larry's been out talking with various farmers and such, trying to get information on what type of farm equipment, what kind of vehicles larger vehicles would use the roundabout, how big are they, you know, how many axles, all the dimensions, so that we can design these facilities. And if you've been, there are other locations in Oregon and all over the country where that's a similar issue, where they're in kind of rural areas and we need to get the farm equipment through there. So, for example, if you're familiar, there's a new one that Washington County built about 3-4 years ago north of Shoals on 219. The Shoals River Road. That roundabout was designed, and we actually had a farmer, that was one of our projects, we actually had a farmer, he had a special piece of, I think it was a potato harvester, that was kind of a custom kind of a thing. He brought it out and ran it through the roundabout before we opened it up, just to make sure that he could get through there. And it's that kind of thing that we try to accommodate. So if you know of something that somebody has that's unique, please let Larry know so we can try to accommodate that.
What happens with the logging trucks?
It's the same thing.
There are logging trucks on Hill and also on Baker Creek.
Sure. So logging trucks, the engineers have when they lay these types of facilities, if a roundabout is the choice, we design it such that it can accommodate those types of vehicles as well. And you'll see if you looked at the design, sometimes it is a challenge because we want to slow cars down as you go through those roundabouts. So we try to narrow it up, but then you also want to accommodate the larger vehicles. So you'll see on the designs, you'll see something called a truck apron. And that's intended to keep the cars in the lane, but allow the duals, for example, of a larger truck to run up on that apron as it makes around the circulating roadway.
What kind of area is involved, land-wise, as for the larger rig type roundabout?
Well, the kind of the footprints that we've shown here, I think to give you a sense, the diameter of these roundabouts, the 2nd Street concept that we've shown is 90 feet across from curb to curb. And then the other two are larger, they're about 130 feet. And so the smaller one at 2nd Street, we would actually, that center section, depending on how big of a vehicle, we may actually need to make a large section of that where the larger vehicles could go over the top because it is smaller. So that comes down to what type of vehicles are we trying to serve to get through the corridor.
What about Meadows? It goes through, we need the traffic on Hill Road.
It's kind of a bigger picture.
So at the Meadows intersection, our traffic model anticipates that property west of Hill Road being developed. It's currently owned by the school district and is potentially a school site. And so the traffic model anticipates that traffic coming onto the Hill Road corridor, and the intersection design there will accommodate those traffic flows.
Okay, so it depends on where you live along the corridor as to what type of property by property impact. So that depending on where you are, we can talk to you kind of after this discussion. Kind of you can come up and we can look at it specifically. If those trees are impacted, there's a process to step through with that in terms from a compensation standpoint. I know that doesn't address your issue from a noise. Now, this is where the engineer in me is going to say something here that maybe it doesn't seem real to you, but from our noise analysts, we do on other types of roadway improvements, we do noise types of analysis. And our noise specialists will say that trees do not address, they don't make it quieter. It makes it feel quieter because maybe you don't see it, but it actually doesn't do much in terms of mitigating noise.
I think we do have some flexibility in the cross-section to also look at where we do have significant trees along the corridor. We can meander sidewalks. The cross-section he showed you had a planar strip between the curb and the sidewalk that can be narrowed, and the sidewalk can meander to save the significant trees that are along the corridor. So the surveying work that's been done to date has identified where those trees are, and in the next steps of design, when they actually start doing grading and the roadway layout, they'll look to save significant trees along the corridor where we can. So,
yeah, very good point.
Going a step further, I'd like to know what kind of sound barrier you are planning, or are you planning any, like fencing?
There's no plans for any kind of noise barriers with the project.
The church on the hill, you know, where it's so steep there, is there any, I know it's pretty dangerous at times, is there any, what engineering ideas do you have to abate that?
So you're talking about where that crest that's hard to see over? Yeah, so that's part of the alternatives work that we are looking at right now too, to see is what options do we have to try to lower that crest down, so to make it flatter and more rounded off so you can see over the top of it better. And so that's something we'll be looking at too over the next few weeks, and looking at that, and hopefully I think next month next time we come back to you, we'll have some information on that, because there is a kind of a cost and an impact with that. There's sewers in that particular area too that would need to be rerouted. There's property owner impacts. That's one area of the corridor as you go over that hill where the right-of-way is fairly tight through there. There's not a lot of space, so we need to look at what could we do within the space we have to try to fix that. I think I see somebody that's had her.
How are the improvements going to affect speed? What's the speed of it? That was my question.
Okay, so how are the improvements going to affect the speed that cars are using the corridor? Well, so the existing corridor is fairly narrow. It's got some sharp curves, and it requires, you might say that the cars need to drive, if they're paying attention, they should drive slower. And when we widen the road, isn't that going to make cars go faster? I would say that some people will drive faster, yes, as a result of that. What we're going to try to do with the design, and certain design features can help encourage slower speeds along the corridor, like the roundabouts, because you do have to slow down. Those have a kind of a circulating tanorum. You need to be going about 20 miles an hour. In the absence of roundabouts, though, what we've proposed is that we look at trying to keep the road a little narrower. We use a median where we don't need a left turn lane, that kind of a landscape of raised median in the center, which brings those curbs in, which tries to encourage drivers. They tend to go a little slower if they don't feel like they've got so much pavement around it. Does that answer your question? I think part of this corridor, part of this project is about kind of defining spaces for all of the users. Right now, it's a corridor that's pretty much set up just for cars. And what this corridor does is it tries to allocate space for all the users and tries to provide room such that the cars can have their place, the bicycles and the pedestrians can operate within the same corridor. The speed limits. So the question is, will the existing speed limits stay the same, or would they be adjusted? And we've heard that question before, and I think you're in the 35 zone. I would expect the 35 zone to stay. a 35 zone. I think as development occurs on the north end, I think the city would probably revisit the potential to lower that 45 down to something less than that. But there's a process that we go through, actually, that the state regulates with the state speed board, where the city can petition to have that corridor reviewed at the time, when basically it's based on the premise of people drive the reasonable and prudent speed. And if there's nothing to slow down for, if there's no development out there, so you got to wait till kind of the land use changes around the roadway, and then the city would step through that process.
Oh, thank you. Mine is more not a question. Can we make use of the McMinnville television station, and maybe you could go to some roundabouts? I've only been on one as a passenger, and the person didn't know what they were doing. It was dark, and it was very hard. So since we're going to probably have a high school, maybe we're going to have a soccer place, we have a lot of senior homes out there, people won't know what they're doing. So can't you go to some of the ones that you just talked about that you were building? Do a little setup of a little example of how people do it, so people are more informed when they come to the next meeting.
Yeah, we actually there are videos that are available, from, doing kind of over the last 15, 20 years, as more and more roundabouts have been built across the U.S. There's actually a number of kind of instructional kind of roundabout educational information that's available that could be put up on public access if that's or on a website or something that. Yes. So if roundabouts prove to be the concept that the city decides to move forward with, then there is an educational component that we need to incorporate as it's being designed.
But if you're going to have people come back to give you ideas of what you want, in the meantime, we can be learning about what is a roundabout. So when we're going to give our opinions, so if we can dissuade you one way or the other, we're giving you some intelligent,
Sure.
Because this little design here is probably not going to help most of the people in here, or the young kids that are going to be more than 9th and 10th from 11th grade.
Sure. And I'd encourage you to talk to folks. There's a number of folks that are very familiar with them too. So talk to your neighbors. There are many more people who are more familiar with them than, let's say, when we were trying to talk about this 15 years ago.
You have a rule of thumb that the difference cost of a four-way stop versus the roundabout?
I won't hazard a guess at this point at this particular location. But they are, significantly more money, and meaning hundreds of thousands of dollars more money.
Then that would take away from some of the other streets that need to be fixed.
As I said, we do have a budget for this project. Mike is making sure that I remember that. And so that's what the constraint we need to work in. And as I said, that's going to be one of the criteria, is that sometimes there's more than one solution to in terms of how you improve a corridor. And some of them, just like when you go buy a car, you just can't afford the one that you want sometimes.
You talked about flooding, and I know one of the retreats that runs through Rockland Road and Wallace Road is to flood. If there's improvements for water flow into there, have you checked downstream crossings to make sure that it can handle that excess flow?
Yes, that is one of the components that we look at is drainage that's coming towards the road, that we accommodate that. And then we also do need this. The city does have a stormwater master plan, so at some level we do look to see what are those, how have those downstream impacts been assessed if we change the conditions with this project.
How do bicycles get through a roundabout?
There are, I did suggest there's some diagrams at the back here that talk just about that, and it sounds like it looks like you just handed your flyers. Yes.
I wondered what you have designed 3 roundabouts, and I wonder if you anticipate the same volume of traffic on Wallace as the other 2.
there is less traffic coming out of Wallace than there are at the other end. So there is less traffic there than at the other two intersections. And we have the traffic counts that we can provide if that's of interest to you.